Your pie isn't welcome on Sundays anymore. Diane Peterson, the HOA president, told my daughter at our farm entrance gate, blocking the driveway with her luxury SUV. Sarah stood there with her Father's Day gift still warm in her hands, tears welling in her eyes. My wife watched from the kitchen window, her jaw tightening, the same expression I'd seen when she uncovered a $14 million tax fraud scheme for the IRS. They picked the wrong family to separate, she whispered, reaching for her financial forensics notebook. After 42 years designing bridges across America, retirement at our family farm was supposed to be our reward. Martha and I purchased these 20 acres with its old farmhouse 15 years ago, meticulously renovating it into the warm family gathering place we'd always dreamed of. With its long gravel driveway, red barn, and Martha's prized vegetable garden, we'd found our forever home, until the iron fist of bureaucracy slammed shut on our family. We chose this rural farming community specifically because it promised a perfect balance. The piece of country living with just enough neighbors to form a supportive community. Our area, though rural, had fallen under the jurisdiction of the newly formed Countryside Estates HOA 5 years ago, which initially promised preservation of rural character and a welcoming atmosphere for family farms. We'd paid our dues without complaint, investing our life savings into what we believed would be our final sanctuary. Our daughter Sarah graduated from Northwestern with honors and landed a development director position at Cincinnati Children's Hospital last year. The 4-hour drive down country roads is grueling after a 60-hour workweek, but every Sunday without fail, she'd arrive with homemade treats and that infectious laugh that lights up any room. Those weekly visits sustained us through the isolation of rural retirement, swapping stories on the porch swing overlooking our fields, Martha's legendary pot roast dinners with vegetables from our garden, board games that often stretched past midnight. Simple farm traditions that anchored our family through life's constant changes. Sarah's visits weren't just social calls. As we entered our 70s, those Sundays became our lifeline. She'd help me program the increasingly complex television system, assist Martha with computer updates, and handle small repairs around the house that my arthritis made difficult. She'd check our medications, review our doctor appointments, and gently ensure we were managing well. Independence is precious at our age, and Sarah's weekly support helped preserve ours without making us feel dependent or burdensome. The trouble began innocuously enough. At the annual homeowners meeting, the board announced rural character preservation measures to address supposed reports of unwanted traffic on our country roads. They implemented a strict visitor registration system requiring resident pre-approval for all visitors. Initially, the process seemed reasonable until Diane Peterson, a former corporate real estate executive with political ambitions, maneuvered herself into the HOA presidency. Diane's rise to HOA power followed a corporate hostile takeover playbook. I recognized it from my years designing infrastructure for Fortune 500 companies. She began by identifying influential residents with specific vulnerabilities. Dr. Henderson's underwater mortgage after his practice was sued. The Wilsons' desperate need for approval on their son's autism-friendly home modifications. Retired Judge Gallagher's desire for recognition after being forced off the bench. For each, she crafted personalized approaches, interest-free private loans, expedited approvals, or prestigious committee appointments. Her cocktail parties featured top-shelf liquor and catered hors d'oeuvres that cost more than our monthly HOA fees. When questioned about expenses, she'd smile and say, "Just a little something from my personal budget." Meanwhile, she systematically consolidated control by rewriting bylaws in deliberately convoluted language that concealed their true impact. The committee efficiency protocol sounded innocuous until Martha decoded its actual effect, replacing elected representatives with presidential appointees. Within weeks of her election, Diane implemented what she branded as the Community Preservation Protocol, a series of increasingly restrictive policies, culminating in the Sunday Serenity Rule. No outside visitors permitted on Sundays to maintain our community's peaceful character and exclusive atmosphere. The board approved this seismic change during a sparsely attended Tuesday morning meeting, a time when working family members couldn't possibly participate. The announcement came buried in the middle of a 16-page newsletter, sandwiched between updates about flower bed fertilization and recycling guidelines. Many residents didn't even realize what had happened until they attempted to welcome weekend visitors. Father's Day fell on a Sunday last June, my first since surviving triple bypass surgery, a milestone doctors weren't sure I'd reach. Sarah had called excitedly the week before. "Dad, I found Grandma Weber's handwritten apple pie recipe in Mom's old cookbook. I'm waking up at 4 a.m. to bake it exactly how she taught us." I'll never forget Martha's face as we watched from our kitchen window, Sarah standing helplessly at our farm gate, dressed in the blue sundress she'd worn to Thomas's memorial service, clutching the still warm pie. The perfectly golden crust visible through the glass container was topped with a pastry heart and the words, "Love you, Dad." Diane Peterson, in her crisp navy blazer and white pants, had parked her luxury SUV to block our driveway. She pointed an accusatory finger at Sarah, her voice sharp enough to carry across the property. "I'm sorry, but your pie isn't welcome here on Sundays. New HOA policy. No family gatherings permitted on weekends without prior board approval." When Sarah explained it was Father's Day and I was recovering from heart surgery, Diane's expression remained cold. Rules are rules. If we make one exception, everyone will want special treatment. We watched our daughter turn away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, the pie that represented 3 generations of family tradition clutched against her chest. From where we stood on our porch, we could hear Sarah's voice crack. "Please, it's Father's Day. I drove 4 hours to see my dad." Diane crossed her arms firmly. "Board's orders. No exceptions." We watched our only daughter turn away, shoulders slumped, wiping tears from her cheeks. Something broke inside me that day, a fundamental trust in the decency of the rural community we'd chosen for our final chapter. Sarah had taken precious time off work, risen before dawn to bake my favorite dessert, and driven 4 hours only to be treated like an unwelcome intruder at the entrance of her parents' farm. Later that evening, I watched from our barn loft as Diane entertained at least 8 guests on the sprawling deck of her modernized farmhouse across the road. Laughing, music playing, wine glasses clinking well into the night. Their luxury cars, with out-of-state plates, remained undisturbed along her winding country driveway. The hypocrisy was as transparent as it was infuriating. The following Tuesday, I marched into the monthly HOA meeting with righteous indignation burning in my chest. The converted barn that served as our community meeting space was unusually crowded, tension palpable as farmers and rural homeowners whispered among themselves. "This is outrageous," I declared, standing to address the room. "You've implemented rules that keep families apart. My daughter couldn't visit on Father's Day because of this arbitrary Sunday ban." Diane adjusted her designer blazer, pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. That practiced corporate smile never quite reached her eyes. "Mr. Richards, I understand your frustration, but these rules are for everyone's protection and community values. We've had numerous complaints about weekend traffic, noise, and security concerns." "What complaints? From whom?" I challenged myself, scanning the room. Several neighbors nodded in agreement. Tom Bailey, a retired high school principal who kept bees on his 10 acres, raised his hand. "My son's family was turned away last weekend. Their grandchildren missed the fishing day at our pond that we'd planned for months." Eleanor Wilson, recently widowed after 57 years of marriage on their century-old family orchard, spoke with quiet dignity. "My sister came from Oregon to help me after Paul passed. She was turned away at my farm gate on Sunday, the only day her flight could arrive." Others shared similar stories, painting a clear pattern of families disrupted and support systems severed. Diane maintained her professional composure, though her knuckles whitened around her leather portfolio. "Change is always difficult, but we must consider the greater good. Our property values have increased 12% since implementing stronger security measures." Martha sat silently beside me, her expression unreadable to most, but I recognized that focus from her IRS days. She was cataloging every word, every inconsistency. Her hand found mine under the table, a gentle squeeze communicating volumes. The meeting adjourned with vague promises to review community feedback. Walking home along the gravel path that connected neighboring farms, Martha finally broke her silence. "John, Did you notice the Petersons had at least 6 cars in their driveway last Sunday? She was right. From our barn loft with its view across the rolling fields, we'd observed Diane hosting what appeared to be an elaborate dinner party. Cars with out-of-state plates parked prominently along her winding country driveway. One rule for the board, another for the rest of us, I muttered. Martha stopped suddenly, her gaze distant, the same expression she wore when uncovering major discrepancies during her auditing career. Something's not adding up here, John. And if there's one thing retirement hasn't changed about me, it's that you still follow the money, I finished, a spark of hope kindling for the first time in weeks. Exactly. And money always tells the truth, even when people won't. Martha didn't simply work for the IRS. She was a legend in the financial forensics division. 27 years as a senior tax auditor gave her an uncanny ability to spot patterns and inconsistencies that others missed. She'd brought down tax evasion schemes that corporate lawyers had spent millions designing. On Thursday morning, I awoke to find her already at the dining table, surrounded by financial statements, bylaws, and meeting minutes she'd requested from the HOA's public records. "Sleep well?" I asked, pouring coffee. "Look at this," she said, ignoring my question. Landscaping costs increased 340% in 14 months, despite the volunteer gardening committee doing most of the maintenance. The invoices list specialty services with no itemization. She pointed to another highlighted section. Administrative fees, $78,000 last year alone. When I was treasurer 5 years ago, that line item was $12,000 and covered more services. The rural road maintenance documentation particularly troubled her. They initially quoted $45,000 for the gravel and drainage upgrades. Final cost, $137,000. The additional $92,000 is attributed to specialized rural engineering requirements with zero specification. Martha's methodical mind worked like a master chess player seeing 12 moves ahead. She created timelines correlating board member appointments with financial irregularities. She cross-referenced vendor names with county property records. She called her former colleague, David Winters, who still worked as a director at the IRS. Over coffee on our porch, they analyzed the documents with professional scrutiny. "Classic shell game," David muttered, adjusting his reading glasses. "They're moving money between accounts to obscure the actual expenditures. See how they're fragmenting larger purchases into multiple smaller invoices under different budget categories." Martha nodded. "And these vendor names, 3 different company letterheads, but identical formatting, same grammatical errors. I'd bet my pension they're shell companies feeding to the same account." David whistled softly. "You always did have an eye for the details others missed. Remember the Minneapolis case? Started with invoice discrepancies just like these. That case recovered $14 million in diverted funds," Martha replied, her determination cementing. "This might be a smaller scale, but the pattern is identical. Someone's treating our community funds like their personal ATM." As they strategized, I watched my wife transform from a retired senior into the formidable investigator who'd made white-collar criminals tremble for decades. Martha wasn't just good at following money trails. She was relentless. "Start with the bank statements," David advised. "Follow the actual cash flows, not just the reported allocations." Martha's eyes narrowed with purpose. "John, we're going to need external assistance. These records are incomplete by design." Martha submitted a formal request to the HOA for complete financial records, a right guaranteed to every homeowner under state law. The response arrived by certified mail just 3 days later. Not financial documents, but a cease and desist letter on heavy legal letterhead. "The board considers your inquiries harassment and an unwarranted burden on administrative resources," it stated coldly. "Further actions may result in legal consequences, including fines under community covenant regulations." The letter was signed by Jameson, Peabody, and Thorne, a prestigious law firm whose retainer surely exceeded our HOA's typical legal budget. The excessive legal response to a simple records request raised even more red flags. Martha read it twice, then inexplicably smiled. "They're scared, John. You don't bring out the lawyers unless you're protecting something significant." Should we back off? I asked, concerned about potential legal expenses on our fixed retirement income. State law is explicitly on our side, Martha replied, setting the letter aside. This is intimidation, not valid legal action. They're hoping we'll be scared by the letterhead and fancy language. 3 days later, a plain white envelope appears wedged in our door frame. No postmark, no return address, just a handwritten note on plain paper. Stop asking questions before you regret it. I felt a chill reading those words. The veiled threat seemed wildly disproportionate to what had begun as simple questions about visitor policies. That's criminal intimidation, I said, reaching for the phone. We should call the police. Martha gently lowered my hand. This is intimidation, not an actual threat. They're hoping we'll back down. We need more evidence before involving authorities. How can you be so calm about this? I demanded. Because I've seen this playbook before, she explained, carefully preserving the note in a plastic sleeve. When powerful people feel threatened, they follow a predictable pattern. First formal obstruction, then anonymous intimidation, then targeted harassment. We need to prepare for the next phase without overreacting to this one. Subtle changes rippled through our once friendly neighborhood. Casual conversations ended abruptly when we approached. Invitations to community events mysteriously stopped arriving. Neighbors who initially supported us suddenly found urgent reasons to cross the street when they saw us coming. Frank Donovan, who'd vocally supported us at the meeting, apologized tearfully one evening on our porch. They're threatening special assessments on my property for landscape violations. I can't afford to fight them, John. My pension barely covers my existing bills. What violations? I asked, looking at his meticulously maintained yard. They claim my garden gnomes violate the aesthetic guidelines, Frank said, voice trembling with both rage and fear. Guidelines that didn't exist until yesterday. The special assessment they're proposing equals 3 months of my medication costs. The isolation strategy was working. Fear spreads faster than courage in retirement communities where fixed incomes make financial vulnerability a constant concern. Even legitimate complaints go unchallenged when challenging authority might mean choosing between standing up for principles or affording necessary medications. The pressure took its toll. My blood pressure medications needed adjustment. Martha developed insomnia. The stress of being community pariahs while pursuing what felt increasingly like a dangerous investigation weighed heavily on us both. Then my heart acted up, atrial fibrillation, exacerbated by stress according to my cardiologist. I spent 3 nights in the hospital. Sarah drove down immediately upon hearing the news, but couldn't come to our farm on Sunday to help during my early recovery. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. She was permitted on our property Wednesday as a healthcare provider, but banned on Sunday as family. The arbitrary distinction revealed the absurdity of rules designed not for community welfare but for control. I watched through our farmhouse window as my daughter sat in her car at the end of our long driveway that Sunday, crying during a phone conversation with Martha. The helplessness in that moment, seeing my child unable to enter our farm when I needed her most, crystallized everything wrong with what our rural community had become. I should never have bought in a place with an HOA. I told Martha that evening as she helped me organize my new medication regimen. We're too old to start over somewhere else, but I hate feeling trapped here. Don't give up yet, Martha said, her quiet determination unshaken. The more obstacles they create, the more certain I am that something significant is happening. People don't fight this hard to protect minor misconduct. Her tablet chimed with an incoming email. Her contact in the county records office had sent property registration documents for board members. John, she said quietly, sliding a document across the table. Diane Peterson's previous address doesn't just match the headquarters of our security contractor. It's the exact same property as 3 other vendors who've received HOA contracts. And look at this mortgage filing. Martha pointed to a highlighted section. Her $780,000 vacation home was purchased just 3 weeks after our HOA transferred $137,000 for rural security infrastructure. With a down payment of exactly $135,000 in cash. She turned another page. The contractor? A shell company registered to her brother-in-law James that has no employees, no equipment, and no other clients. Her finger traced a diagram she'd created showing money flowing from our annual dues directly into Diane's personal accounts. She's not just bending rules. She's running a criminal enterprise using our retirement savings. But Martha's investigation took a stunning turn the following day. While dropping off homemade apple butter at the Henderson farm, she spotted Diane's brother-in-law installing what looked like surveillance cameras on their property line, aimed directly at our farmhouse. When confronted, he claimed they were wildlife monitors for the Agricultural Committee. Martha's research revealed no such committee existed. Even more damning was her discovery, through carefully cultivated friendship with Jason, the local college student who monitored weekend road access, that Diane had created an elaborate system of secret codes and signals. She calls them service provider exemptions, Jason confided, showing Martha the logbook, but it's just for her friends and family. They flash their headlights 3 times or call her cell directly. He pointed to dozens of entries. See these Sunday visitors with landscape consultation labels? They were carrying casserole dishes and wine bottles. Meanwhile, I had to turn away Mr. Chen's daughter who was bringing him medication. This isn't just hypocrisy, Martha concluded, showing me photographs she'd taken of Diane's Sunday gatherings. They're systematically creating one set of rules for ordinary residents and another for themselves. The question is, what are they so desperate to hide that they'd go to these lengths to isolate us from our families? $127,438. Martha announced one morning, setting down her calculator with quiet precision. That's the exact amount they've diverted over 37 months. Almost a quarter of our total HOA revenue. Our dining room had transformed into an investigation headquarters. Martha had created an elaborate spreadsheet tracing every suspicious transaction, color-coded and cross-referenced with timeline events. She'd identified patterns that painted a disturbing picture. Premium fencing installed around 4 board members' private properties, $22, $670 billed to community boundary maintenance. Premium landscaping services at Diane's vacation property in Saugatuck, $18, $940 categorized as Rural Character Preservation Project. High-end irrigation systems installed on the Vice President's personal fields, $15, $325 listed as Community Water Management despite our shared pond access paths still washing out with every heavy rain. All these expenditures were authorized using emergency fund provisions that bypassed general membership approval. Martha's friend Patricia Alvarez on the City Planning Commission confirmed what we'd begun to suspect. Diane's brother-in-law James doesn't just own the security company. He's a silent partner in 3 other vendors doing business with your HOA, all registered to the same business address. Most disturbing was the architectural plan Martha found buried in a financial statement appendix, labeled innocuously as Future Facilities Update. The detailed drawings showed an exclusive executive retreat center, featuring a wine cellar, private theater, and indoor pool, using $340,000 from our supposed infrastructure reserve fund. While planning this private sanctuary, they'd systematically cut basic services, reduced snow removal from twice daily to once weekly, shortened pool hours to save on lifeguards, eliminated holiday decorations as unnecessarily extravagant, and removed the complimentary coffee service from the community room. Meanwhile, they'd increased annual dues 3 times in 18 months, citing rising maintenance costs and unforeseen infrastructure challenges. The pattern became increasingly clear. They were siphoning resources upward, creating luxury for themselves while imposing austerity on everyone else. Classic kleptocracy just on a neighborhood scale. Martha's former IRS colleague helped us access property tax records, revealing another troubling connection. 3 board members had recently purchased investment properties in adjacent communities, properties they could never afford on their disclosed incomes, unless they had access to undeclared funds. They're not just stealing, Martha concluded grimly. They're building personal real estate portfolios with our money. Our evidence grew stronger each day. Martha approached the investigation like the seasoned professional she was, methodically building an airtight case that no lawyer could dismantle. The dining room table became command central, covered with financial records she'd color-coded to reveal the hidden patterns of corruption. In the IRS, we had a saying, she told me one evening as moonlight streamed through the farmhouse windows. Follow not just the money, but the timing. When people steal, they leave fingerprints in the sequence. Her discovery that major withdrawals coincided perfectly with Diane's family vacations and property purchases was particularly damning. When I suggested confronting the board early, Martha's expression turned serious. Rural folks like us only get one shot at taking down powerful people, she said, carefully organizing evidence in a fireproof lockbox. We can't just be right, we need to be undeniable. We needed allies, but discretion was crucial. Martha started with Eleanor Wilson, whose integrity was beyond question. Over tea in Eleanor's immaculate living room, Martha carefully shared selected findings. Eleanor's hands trembled as she reviewed the documents. They denied my sister's Sunday visits after Paul died, Eleanor confided, voice quavering. 57 years we were married, and when I needed family most, they cited regulations. Meanwhile, Diane's college friends park in visitor spots every weekend. Eleanor's situation was particularly heartbreaking. Her husband Paul had been Countryside Estate's unofficial historian, documenting the rural community's growth from its founding. After his sudden stroke, Eleanor had fallen into deep depression. Her sister Margaret, a retired nurse from Oregon, had arranged extended leave to help Eleanor through the grieving process. But after 3 weeks, the new Sunday rule meant Margaret could only visit 6 days weekly, missing the important after-church time when Eleanor struggled most with memories of Paul. I actually believed them when they said it was for everyone's benefit, Eleanor whispered, dabbing at her eyes. I felt guilty for wanting an exception, like I was being selfish. That's what's so cruel about it. They made me feel ashamed for needing my own sister. Eleanor introduced us to Frank Donovan, a retired construction manager who'd managed federal projects before retirement. His expertise proved invaluable. These contractor quotes are inflated by at least 60%, he confirmed, reviewing the documents through professional eyes. I built commercial properties for 40 years. These numbers are pure fiction. The security gate system they installed? I called 3 contractors. Highest bid was $52,000 for the exact specifications. Frank spread architectural drawings across his dining room table, identifying discrepancies between approved plans and actual installations. They downgraded materials on common areas while using premium finishes on board members' pet projects. These security cameras. He tapped the invoice. Basic models at the community barn, but military-grade surveillance systems at Diane's and the vice president's properties. Frank had his own painful story. His son's family had planned a Memorial Day visit, grandchildren excited to fish at the community pond with Grandpa Donovan. They'd arrived Saturday to find the pond access mysteriously restricted, then were denied entrance to his farm entirely on Sunday. The grandchildren, confused and hurt, asked Frank if he didn't want them to visit anymore. One by one, our network expanded. Robert Chen, whose grandchildren were barred from Sunday visits despite his recent cancer diagnosis, while board members' extended families enjoyed pool privileges every weekend. Patricia Lopez, using a walker after hip surgery, was denied a closer parking spot due to first-come policies, while board members had designated spaces installed near every amenity. The Alvarez family, Miguel, a veteran firefighter, and Sophia, a dedicated school nurse, were one of the few younger households in our rural community. They discovered their teenage children's friends were suddenly classified as non-family visitors subject to Sunday restrictions. Their son Diego, a high school basketball star hoping for a college scholarship, couldn't have his coach visit for weekend training sessions on their basketball court. Their daughter Elena missed crucial SAT study groups when classmates couldn't come to their farm. Meanwhile, we all witnessed board member Barbara Hightower's college-age children hosting pond parties with dozens of rowdy friends every weekend, the bass from their music carrying across the fields while Diane personally escorted them down the country road. Each story revealed the same pattern: arbitrary enforcement designed to isolate and control certain community members while privileging others. The selective application of rules created a two-tier system within what was supposed to be a unified community. Most significantly, we connected with Harriet Jameson, who had served as board secretary for 2 months before resigning abruptly last year. After significant hesitation, she shared the real reason for her departure. "I questioned financial discrepancies during my second meeting," Harriet explained, nervously glancing toward her windows. The next day, Diane visited, suggesting my memory issues might make board service too challenging. She mentioned knowing people at the department responsible for seniors' driving certifications, said they could help assess my competence if necessary. The implied threat to her independence had terrified Harriet into silence. Until now. As a 78-year-old widow living alone, losing her driver's license would mean losing her last measure of independence. The subtle intimidation tactic revealed how thoroughly Diane understood the vulnerabilities of our community's elderly residents. "They know exactly which pressure points to use," Harriet explained. "For some, it's threatening their driving privileges. For others, it's implying their lawn violations could result in liens. For families with children, it's restricting amenity access. They've studied us like specimens, identifying each person's greatest fear." Our coalition grew cautiously, professionals with decades of experience united by the realization we'd been systematically marginalized in our own community. We established secure communication channels, using Martha's old IRS protocols to protect everyone involved. The breakthrough came when we identified Janet Kwan, a paralegal at the State Attorney General's office, whose parents lived in our community. Through this connection, we established a confidential channel to share our findings with authorities without alerting the board. "The AG's office sees cases like this more often than you'd think," Janet explained during a discreet meeting at her parents' home. "Especially in upscale communities where residents are older and board members have professional backgrounds that discourage questions. The evidence you've gathered is compelling enough for preliminary review." Martha organized everything into a comprehensive dossier that Janet delivered directly to the state's Financial Crimes Division. Now we could only wait and prepare for the confrontation we knew was coming. We called for an emergency HOA meeting under Bylaw Provision 12.4, Financial Transparency Review. Despite the board's attempts to schedule it midweek when working families and active farmers couldn't attend, state regulations required accommodation of our proposed Saturday timing. Old Man Jenkins' restored barn was packed to capacity, hay bales and folding chairs hastily added as rural residents filled every available space. The tension was palpable. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in months exchanged uncertain glances across the dirt floor. Board members sat rigidly at their folding table on the small raised platform, Diane's perfectly manicured nails tapping an irritated rhythm on her leather portfolio. "This irregular meeting isn't properly authorized," Diane began, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to controlling narratives. "Article 12, Section 4 of our bylaws." Martha interrupted calmly, rising to her feet. "Every homeowner has the right to call for a financial transparency review when supported by 10% of residents." She gestured to the stack of signed petitions. "We have signatures from 42%. Martha began distributing folders to every resident, comprehensive but accessible summaries of our findings. I watched realization dawn across faces throughout the room. Gasps and murmurs rose as neighbors processed the evidence before them. "Before accusations are carelessly thrown around," Diane interjected, "remember that board members volunteer countless hours managing complex community affairs that most residents lack the expertise to understand." Martha nodded respectfully. "I appreciate dedicated service. That's why we've spent 3 months verifying every figure in these reports." With methodical precision, Martha walked everyone through the evidence, just as she'd done in countless IRS audits. The inflated contracts, the diverted funds, the special privileges, the connection between vendors and board members, the planned executive retreat using reserve funds meant for critical infrastructure. Most troubling, Martha continued, her voice steady, is the pattern of using visitor restrictions to isolate community members who might question these financial practices. When families can't gather, information doesn't flow. When seniors are separated from their support networks, they become easier to intimidate. The color drained from Diane's face. "This is outrageous." She stood abruptly, knocking over her water glass. "I'll have you sued for defamation. These wild conspiracy theories. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation," Martha replied, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Diane's growing agitation. "And I've already submitted these records to the state attorney general's office. Their financial crimes division found them concerning enough to open an investigation." The room erupted. Neighbors who had suffered silently for months found their voices, demanding answers. Board members exchanged panicked glances, whispering urgently among themselves. Diane attempted to adjourn the meeting, citing procedural irregularities, but community bylaws required addressing all agenda items. Cornered, she fell back on condescension. "If you ungrateful people don't like how we manage things, maybe you should move somewhere more suited to your lifestyle and budget constraints." The contempt in her voice was unmistakable. Her words silenced the barn. The only sound was the distant lowing of cattle and wind through the rafters. Then Frank Donovan, 78 years old and normally soft-spoken, slowly rose to his feet, work-worn hands gripping his handcrafted hickory cane. "This land has been our home for generations," he said, his weathered voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who'd spent decades working the soil. "My grandfather cleared these fields. My father dug that pond with his own hands. And it seems you city folks forgot whose money you're spending." Eleanor Wilson stood next, her slight frame somehow towering. "Paul and I watched our children grow up here, and now our grandchildren play in the same meadows. We tended this community before you arrived with your improvements and fancy degrees." One by one, farmers and rural homeowners stood, weathered faces set with determination, a living wall of resilience against corporate greed. Within 2 weeks, the Attorney General's investigation was front-page news. Within a month, Diane and 3 board members faced criminal charges. And the following Sunday, as Martha and I sat on our porch watching Sarah's car roll up our gravel driveway, Pi balanced carefully on her passenger seat, I realized some victories are measured not in dollars, but in the simple freedom to welcome your child home.